The congressional oversight hearing had barely begun when Kash Patel, seated confidently behind the microphone with his trademark smirk, launched the first volley. "Ms. Crockett," he said, dragging out her name like a punchline, "before we even entertain your opinions on constitutional law, let's establish your qualifications. Remind us, what ivory tower of jurisprudence did you graduate from again? Because I could have sworn I saw your alma mater listed below a community college on the rankings last year." Laughter bubbled from a few GOP aides seated behind him, eyes gleaming with the thrill of blood sport. Jasmine Crockett remained calm, spine straight, lips pressed into a half-smile. "UCLA School of Law," she replied evenly. "Ranked 14th in the nation last I checked. And in case rankings are all that matter to you, I graduated with honors in constitutional law." Kash leaned back smugly. "Right, honors. Let's not pretend GPA makes you Scalia. I've seen interns with honors who can't tell Miranda. Rights from Mariah Carey lyrics." The room tittered again. Jasmine didn't flinch. Is this a hearing on constitutional oversight, or a roast hosted by a man who didn't even attend a top-tier law school? She fired back, her tone still measured but steel-lined. Across the room, Reppers Jamie Raskin coughed to suppress a chuckle. Kash's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I studied law, all right. Georgetown." "Yet somehow," Jasmine said, leaning forward, "you still struggle with the basic definition of due process." The chamber hushed. The mood shifted. Kash flushed slightly but kept his cool. "Fine," he said. "Maybe your education impressed someone, though clearly not enough to get you invited to any serious legal symposiums. But since you're so proud of it, maybe your law professors can defend your recent interpretation of executive privilege, because it was laughable." He turned toward the gallery. "Unless, of course, they're hiding in shame." A quiet shuffle sounded from the back. A gray-haired man in a navy suit, lean and intense, stood slowly. "Actually," came a voice that sliced through the silence, "I'm here." The room pivoted. Gasps echoed as a few staffers realized who it was. Professor Alan Reston, the storied constitutional scholar from UCLA who had mentored federal judges and written landmark briefs cited by the Supreme Court, stepped forward. Kash blinked, caught off guard. "And you are?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Professor Reston," the man said. "I taught Ms. Crockett constitutional law, supervised her thesis on executive power, and I'm here voluntarily because when I watched your remarks last week on national television, I recognized a dangerous misunderstanding of legal boundaries and a pathetic attempt to disguise condescension as critique." Kash stiffened. "With respect, Professor, this isn't your classroom." "Thank God," Reston snapped. "Because if it were, I'd have failed you already for your citation of Article 2 in that disgraceful memo to the Judiciary Committee." A wave of murmurs swept the hearing room. Reston walked toward the dais, his presence radiating gravitas. Ms. Crockett's thesis dissected the evolution of executive privilege from Washington to Nixon to Trump. She argued, correctly, that modern abuses stem not from the privilege itself, but from partisan shielding of presidential misconduct. Kash interjected, "That's an opinion." "It's a legal position, Mr. Patel, backed by 176 citations, 6 judicial precedents, and peer-reviewed endorsement by 3 constitutional law journals." Reston's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He turned to the committee chair. "And if this body is interested in facts instead of theatrical bullying, I have her thesis here. I'll let her footnotes speak louder than this man's sarcasm." Reston dropped the thick-bound paper on the table with a quiet thud. Jasmine tilted her head ever so slightly, the corner of her lip rising in gratitude. Kash scoffed, clearly unsettled now. "So we're quoting student papers now? Is this what legal standards have come to?" Jasmine finally spoke again, her voice lower, sharper. "No, Kash. What it's come to is grown men mocking black women's intellect in public hearings. to distract from their own fragility. You asked for credentials. Now you're angry they're better than yours. A hush fell again, heavy. My education doesn't need your validation, but it seems your ego does. Kash gripped the microphone. You're trying to play victim, Ms. Crockett. I'm not a victim, she said. I'm a lawyer, and more importantly, I know the law better than you do. Reston nodded. She does. A member of the press snapped a photo. In that moment, Kash realized he was no longer in control of the narrative. Let me tell you what this is really about, Jasmine continued, standing now. It's about fear. Fear of women like me who've worked twice as hard for half the recognition. And when we finally sit at the table, men like you try to mock the cutlery instead of addressing the meal. Some on the committee audibly murmured, Amen. Kash, flustered, tried to pivot. This hearing isn't about you. Then stop making it about me, she said, cutting him off. Stop projecting your resentment onto my resume. You want to talk law? Let's talk law. But if you want to turn this into a pissing match over GPAs, then you've already lost. Because I don't measure intelligence in inches of arrogance. The room sat in stunned silence. Even the C-SPAN cameraman seemed unsure whether to zoom in on Kash's reddening face or Jasmine's poised defiance. Suddenly, the committee chair cleared his throat. Given the disruption and the lack of substantive legal rebuttal from Mr. Patel, we'll move on. Ms. Crockett's points stand. Kash tried to object, but the chair gavelled him down. Sit down, Mr. Patel. Jasmine gathered her papers, nodded to Reston, and walked out slowly, deliberately. As she passed Kash's table, she whispered without looking, Next time, read the footnotes. Professor Reston followed behind her, turning only once to stare directly at Kash. I don't appear in hearings often, he said aloud, but when I do, it's usually because someone's ignorance demands public correction. The room erupted. Committee members whispered to each other, and even a few conservative aides avoided eye contact. Outside the chamber, as the doors swung closed behind her, Jasmine pulled out her phone. A message lit up from an unknown number. That was the best live schooling I've seen in a decade. If you ever want a clerk at the Ninth Circuit, give me a call. Jasmine smiled faintly. In Washington, you don't always win the room. But sometimes when your mentor speaks truth to power, the room never forgets you walked through it. The lights of the live town hall were blinding, the kind of artificial white that turned sweat into a spotlight and truth into theater. Vivek Ramaswamy, perched in his chair with the swagger of someone who'd memorized his talking points and practiced his smirks, was mid-sentence when it happened. Now look, he said with a chuckle, waving dismissively. I get it. Jasmine's passionate, but I could barely understand her last argument. I mean, no offense, that Texas twang was so thick I thought I was listening to a character from a cowboy movie. The crowd gave a few awkward laughs, some more amused by the audacity than the joke. Jasmine Crockett, seated opposite him, didn't move. Her eyes fixed on Vivek, calm and unreadable. The moderator, sensing the tension, quickly shifted in her seat. Representative Crockett, would you like to respond? Jasmine leaned forward slowly, her voice steady, precise, and devoid of any trace of apology. I find it fascinating that when you run out of policy, you reach for my pronunciation. You mock my accent as if diction is the measure of intellect, as if people who sound like me haven't passed the bar, haven't written legislation, haven't stood in front of judges who sound just like you, and won. Vivek raised an eyebrow, but she cut him off before he could interject. My accent is the sound of generations who built this country without ever owning it, of people who learned law in courtrooms that once wouldn't let them speak. So mock it if you want. But understand, every syllable you hear is backed by 1,000 stories you could never survive. The audience fell into a deep, sudden silence. Vivek sat straighter, trying to pivot. Jasmine, don't get so emotional. It was just a joke. She gave a faint smile. The only people who call identity mockery just a joke are the ones who've never had theirs ridiculed on a national stage. The moderator looked increasingly uncomfortable, but Jasmine wasn't done. You ever wonder why people from elite institutions sound the same? She asked. Because they're taught to erase themselves? I didn't come here to blend in. With the Ivy League echo chamber, I came here to represent those who never got invited to the room. And if that means sounding like the South, then good. I bring the whole South with me. The crowd stirred, murmurs rising like a tide. Vivek, visibly rattled now, tried again. Well, if that's your platform, identity politics and linguistics, I guess you've made your case. Jasmine's gaze sharpened. My platform is truth. And the truth is, you're threatened. Not by my voice, but by what it carries. It carries conviction. It carries clarity. And clearly, it carries enough power to shake you. The moderator glanced down at her cards, flustered, and said, We'll go to the audience now for questions. But a question didn't come. Something else did. From the back row, an older woman stood up. Dressed simply but with unmistakable dignity, she held a mic handed to her by a producer. My name is Louise Chambers, she said, her voice wavering but full. I'm 72, grew up picking cotton in East Texas.